The NFL draft is less than a week away, but we are still doing film versus analytics. Each day, we are breaking down a new rookie based on the Dynasty ADP, battling them out, film versus analytics. I'm your host, Brett Whitefield, the resident film expert here at Fantasy Points, and I am joined by the CEO himself and also the man who happens to be the analytical beast behind the Fantasy Points model series. That is Scott Barrett. If you're interested in anything you hear say today, please go to fantasypoints.com and check out the 2024 prospect guide or the aforementioned model series put out by Scott Barrett himself. Today, we are talking about Blake Corum, Michigan running back. Without further ado, let's get after it. Scott, I'm really excited for you to sit here and yell at me and tell me why you hate Blake Corum and he sucks, he stinks, blah, 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 blah. Let's go.
All right, let's do it. So I'll start off with a good, just going off of the counting stats, like you pull up his box score numbers in College Football Reference, and you can make a very compelling case. Blake Corum is probably the RB1 in the class, or at least the best workhorse in the class, because he only had 24 catches in his best season. So maybe questionable PPR upside, but certainly really good. Lots of stats, lots of rushing yards, lots of touchdowns. The issue is he looked a whole lot worse by all of the key efficiency metrics that matter to me, matter to my model. So in contrast to all day one or day two running backs since 2014, his 2022 season ranked 30th percentile by yards after contact per attempt, 52nd percentile by error adjusted missed tackles forced per touch. In 2023, those numbers fell to first percentile in yards after contact per attempt, and then by error adjusted missed tackles forced per touch. It was the worst season of 123 qualifying seasons. And so that's definitely something we need to talk about. Like, in his great season 2 years ago, it still wasn't really all that good. It was average by one stat, below average by the other. And then last year it was horrible. He was obscenely inefficient, 4.97 yards per touch. That's 9th percentile. Do we blame this on injury? Because he suffered a meniscus tear and an MCL sprain only 9 months before the start of the season. Maybe he came back a little early. The question then is this simply who he is now? Maybe he's lost too much tread from his tires, or maybe we should expect an efficiency bounce back. Like, oh, of course he struggled his first year back from injury, just like running backs typically struggle their first year back from an ACL and then bounce back to 100% the next season. That's more of a question for Edwin, who was a little more optimistic, still a question mark, but a little optimistic, especially given how much better you thought he looked in the second half of the year. He's also one of the oldest running backs in the class. This is a fun stat. So Blake Corum had 33 rushing yards before turning 20 years old. Braylon Allen had 3,494. So nearly 3,500 more before turning 20. And that was like the big takeaway, is like there's very little difference between Blake Corum and Braylon Allen analytically. And I don't even really like Braylon Allen, but ultimately Corum slots in as my RB3, mostly out of deference to you, who has him as the RB1. He's also an perfectly average athlete, by the way. And then also because, his most likely landing spot is like the nuts landing spot with the Chargers in round 2. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about Blake Corum. I really like the top 2 running backs in the class. And then after that, it just feels like a giant tier to me. Corum feels like Alexander Madison-esque, like really good RB2 who could have some great DFS weeks if the starter goes down, or potentially like a lower end starter who doesn't last very long. That was just kind of my vibe. But again, your film score matters a lot to me. Don't like the other running back. So he was ultimately my RB3, your RB1. And all right, now it's your turn.
Scott, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound?
Yeah.
If Blake Corum jukes somebody out so bad the defender doesn't get his hands on him, does PFF chart it as a missed tackle? No, they do not.
That's key. That's honestly key. That's a key point. Is it listen, this is the most predictive metric I have at my disposal because you're too lazy to chart all 12,000 college football games. But this is a concern. Uh, I brought up looking at a Will Shipley, looking at a Christian McCaffrey, looking at a Jameer Gibbs, is there might be some sort of charting bias against smaller, skinnier, faster running backs as opposed to, super physical. I don't know. It's a concern. So
Yeah.
could be off here. And like I said, I really value your film expertise. So let me know what you think I'm missing.
Yeah, no, I've done the research myself on the force miss tackle stuff. You are 100% correct there. That is predictive. That's sticky. It's almost like undeniable if somebody excels in that statistic, they do well in the NFL, right? But it doesn't capture the guys who don't perform well in that, unfortunately. But here, let me just go through the pros and cons of Blake Corum, and then we can wrap it up with a better discussion. But Blake Corum checks all three of the boxes for me for premium traits. He has what I would call eagle eye vision, probably best vision in the class. I mentioned it on the Ross Tucker podcast. I'll mention it here again. The benefit of playing in the Michigan offense is that they run every single run concept there is. Corum has experience playing in zone, playing in gap, playing behind pullers with power and counter. He understands all of his keys. His footwork is incredible. His vision, he understands how to manipulate defenders with his eyes, how to cut off one foot and force linebackers to make decisions. He's going to get a lot of yards just by him simply having incredible vision, incredible pacing behind the line of scrimmage, and understanding what each run concept is designed to do. Huge check for me. Secondly, he has what I call Tesla Model S acceleration slash burst. This dude gets from 0 to 60 incredibly fast, like lightning fast, like unbelievable stuff. Now I know he doesn't have the same home run hitting potential a lot of these guys have, like a Trey Benson, a John Brooks. Although I think Brooks is still kind of meh in that regard. Will Shipley's got great long speed. Corum doesn't have that. He's not going to outrun fast corners to the end zone. He did it occasionally when he was healthy, but ultimately he's more of a bursty kind of guy. Short area quickness, elite lateral quickness there. The change of direction skills are incredible. And then I put on here, he can create beyond his blockers because of that cutting ability. Some of the high level plays I could show you, Scott, of him making guys miss, they're legitimately jaw dropping. And you would ask yourself, well, why wouldn't he be able to do this at the NFL level? And the reality is he can. So another thing I love about Corum, Scott, is when you look at him, he is completely jacked out of his mind. He has muscles in places that most people don't. He's only 5'7". I think he's 208 pounds. I was told by a good source he played closer to 220 last year. He was a little heavy coming off of that injury. Also knew he'd be taking like 300 carries, so he wanted some weight for that. I think ultimately his comfortable playing weight is in that 205 to 210 range. That's when you see that burst and acceleration. I do think he is an effective pass catcher, and he's really good in pass pro. I know the pass catch, similar to Trey Benson, the pass catching volume wasn't there. But if you're familiar with the Michigan offense, you know about Donovan Edwards, right, Scott?
Oh
The,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
That was Dane Brugler's RB1 heading into the season.
Right. So Donovan Edwards kind of has that change of pace, scat back role. Blake Corum actually invented that role. You go back to the 2021 season. Now the receiving volume still wasn't exceptional, but the way they were using him on those motions and jet sweep plays, lining up in the slot, like he invented that role and then turned into the early down workhorse. So I think had they kept going with that, if Donovan Edwards didn't exist, you would see Blake Corum in a really high volume pass catching scenario there because he has the chops. You see that on tape for sure. Bad side of Corum here is he's probably undersized for his archetype, right? Early, he immediately projects as an early down workhorse type, and I get he's really dense. He's got good body mass. I already mentioned how muscular he is, but still 207 pounds isn't ideal for a guy who you want to carry the ball 20 times a game and might have efficiency issues, right? That could be problematic. Other thing is like he runs out of gas on those long runs. I think he's got the good burst. I think he even has good top speed, like 4.51 or whatever he ran at the combine. It's not terrible. But he really does run out of gas on like 60 plus yard runs. He gets caught from behind quite a bit. Um, Ultimately, though, I do think he has the potential to be an every down player. His best role is probably something similar to what we saw Austin Eckler play, maybe J.K. Dobbins in Baltimore, where it is a little committee-ish, where, like, maybe, he's I would call him a lead back, not a bell cow. I don't know that I feel comfortable with him getting 20 plus touches a game at his size. So that definitely nerves him for fantasy a little bit, but if he gets in the right offense, that could be great.
Yeah, I like it. Also, nice name drop on Donovan Edwards. That's a good point. That he was still the bell cow despite competing against a top 15 Devy running back, and even the stat I mentioned about him versus Allen before their age 20 season, like it's notable. He was the team's RB2 as a freshman, ahead of Zach Charbonnet, ahead of Chris Evans. Um, and massive, like obscenely more efficient than Hassan Haskins, who's another player in the NFL in his
Day
sophomore
2 pick.
season. So what's that?
He was a day 2 pick too, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's all good, important context. Like I said, I didn't love the prospect profile. I questioned the upside on and all these other things, but luckily the running back position is far and away the most volume dependent position in all of fantasy. Where I'm not saying it's all that matters, but it's like damn near close to all that matters. And so he goes to the Chargers with John Harbaugh in round 2. Like that's game over. So Jim Harbaugh. Did I say John
Yeah,
Harbaugh?
you said John, but yeah,
Yeah,
we got it.
Jim
We got
Jim Harbaugh. Or if he gets that sort of draft capital, or if he gets, a nuts landing spot. And I like I said, I don't like this class a whole lot after him. So I think there's a good chance he gets it. And if he does, I could see him being really successful for fantasy. So um, I'm not too mad at your RB1 ranking at the end of the day, but I do think there's clearly two guys ahead of him from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, he's probably a guy we need to watch together because I do think the unfortunate 2023 him coming off the injury really skews the efficiency numbers. And I know it still wasn't great even if you remove that season, but I think you'd be more impressed with his ability to make guys miss if you actually watched him. Um,
Yeah, let's watch his 22.
yeah, we should watch him. Another thing I want to say too is there's a myth out there that Michigan was some incredible running team last year. They really weren't. They ranked like 50th in college football in yards per carry. Like that offensive line really struggled. I know people I have this thrown in my face all the time about JJ. It's like, oh, he had an elite offensive line. He didn't have one offensive lineman that's going to go day 1 or day 2. Not one. Like collectively as a unit, they were decent. But I think Blake Corum really was the engine that stirred the Michigan drink the last couple seasons with the way Jim Harbaugh called plays there. I mean, it's kind of undeniable. You already mentioned the difference between him and Edwards from an efficiency standpoint there, and I think that stands on its head alone. But
He
um,
was running against stacked boxes all day. Like,
oh,
first and
I,
10, what's about to happen.
yeah, someone just put out a chart recently. He had by far the most 8-man boxes, but it's like I think he has double the next guy over his career, which is insane. So that's going to nerf efficiency too. I always say this to you, Scott, but not all forced missed tackles are created equal, right?
Mhm.
Like it's a lot easier to make a guy miss one-on-one in space than it is in the hole when you've got an 8-man box. That's two totally different things. So um, at the end of the day, I stand on the 22 tape. I do think there was signs of life at the end of last season where it looked like he was getting back to normal. So I'm a huge Corum guy. I think he's the total package.
All right. Well, yeah, I can't get too mad at his ADP. Probably not taking him personally right now, but I mean, it really wouldn't surprise me if he gets the draft capital, he gets a nuts landing spot, and he's a guy who skyrockets up in ADP. You're talking about like a 1 QB rookie draft, potentially a mid round 1 pick. Really wouldn't shock me.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm guessing you're gonna be all over him at this current ADP.
Yeah, for sure. We got to get into my style comp though, because you want him
Oh,
to land
that's
with the
right.
Chargers. And what's funny about that is my style comp for him is actually J.K. Dobbins, who the Chargers just signed. Greg Roman also the was the coordinator for Dobbins in Baltimore. Jim Harbaugh played against Dobbins in college. There's just kind of some funny overlaps there. But Corum reminds me a ton of Dobbins with that short area quickness. I know Dobbins probably has more linear explosiveness, more home run hitting potential than Corum ever did. But I see J.K. Dobbins all day.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Corum right now is the RB3 205 in Dynasty. Only 3 spots ahead of Jalen Wright, a player where we neither of us like at all at that
We
cost.
could,
So
yeah.
yeah, and that's probably my big takeaway is I think there's a teardrop after him. And well, I don't know. We'll save it for the next episode. There's
Well,
another running back we're both a little excited about.
yeah, there's landing spot does matter for sure.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: let's say he does indeed get the Chargers capital. You going to bite on that at the ADP, or do you think the ADP goes way up?
Oh, it's going way up for sure.
Okay, okay. Well, that's fair.
All right. Well, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you liked it, please comment, like, subscribe, reply, tell your friends, all that good stuff. And we'll see you guys all soon.